The Galactic Dominion had destroyed 47 civilizations. Humanity was supposed to be 48. They never got to 50. The announcement came on Tuesday. Not that the Dominion knew what a Tuesday was. They didn't bother learning the languages of species they intended to erase. Why memorize the words of something that would cease to exist by the end of the galactic season? Supreme Archon Verath Kas transmitted the declaration of extinction across every human communication frequency simultaneously: radio, quantum band, Neuralink. Even the old analog channels humanity kept running out of what the Dominion's cultural analysts had described as inexplicable sentimentality. The message was translated into 47 languages, every human language, not because they respected humanity enough to speak to them clearly, but because they wanted every single human being to understand exactly what was coming. By order of the Galactic Dominion, the species designated Homo sapiens is hereby sentenced to biological termination. Your sun will be sequenced. Your worlds will be harvested. Your memory will be erased from the galactic record. You have 30 rotations to surrender unconditionally, or the Dominion fleet will demonstrate what mercy you forfeited by existing beyond your station. 30 rotations. Roughly 42 Earth days. The Dominion had given longer warnings before to civilizations they found culturally interesting. The Valorians got 60 days, the Ithrani Collective got 90. Both had fleets numbering in the tens of thousands. Both had faster-than-light travel mastered for over 2 centuries. Both had been reduced to radiation signatures and floating debris. Humanity had 42 days, and the Dominion received nothing. No transmission, no plea for negotiation. No desperate military mobilization broadcast leaking across open channels. No emergency council session picked up by Dominion intelligence satellites. Not even the expected viral explosion of fear communication the cultural analysts had predicted based on humanity's historical behavioral profiles. Just silence. Archon Verath Kas found that mildly interesting, not concerning, merely unusual. His cultural attaché, a thin-limbed academic named Scrivener 7 who had spent 30 years studying humanity's primitive recorded history, shifted uncomfortably in his station. Archon, Scrivener 7 said carefully, the silence may be worth examining before we proceed. Verath Kas didn't look up from the star charts. Species in denial are common. It's a primitive psychological defense mechanism. They'll transmit their surrender within 15 rotations. They always do. Scrivener 7 looked at his data. He looked at humanity's historical record. He looked at 600 years of human behavior patterns loaded into his analytical console. He said nothing more, but his hands never stopped shaking. Scrivener 7 had made a career out of studying what the Dominion called pre-integration species, civilizations too primitive to be allies, too resource-rich to be ignored, too inconvenient to be left alone. He had cataloged the behavioral patterns of 39 different intelligent species in the years before their absorption or elimination. They all followed the same arc: discovery, denial, desperation, negotiation, collapse. Some fought, most surrendered, all fell. But humanity's historical record had kept him up for 30 years, not because they were technologically superior. They weren't. By Dominion standards, humanity was laughably primitive. No unified galactic communications array, no dark matter drives, no biological augmentation beyond crude genetic medicine, no weapons capable of threatening a Dominion cruiser at range. On paper, they were barely a Category 3 civilization, the kind that usually surrendered without firing a single shot. But Scrivener 7 had read the history, all of it. He had read about a species that had never, not once, in 600,000 years of recorded warfare across their single, small, fragile planet stayed surrendered. He had read about conflicts that lasted 100 years, 200, 300, wars fought with sticks and fire, then steel, then explosives, then nuclear fire, then directed energy, each generation picking up weapons the previous generation had put down and saying simply, "Not yet." He had read about a thing called Thermopylae, where 300 soldiers held a mountain pass against 300,000 invaders for 3 days, not because they expected to win, but because they needed to buy time for the ones behind them. He had read about a place called Stalingrad, where an entire city was reduced to rubble, and the survivors fought street by street, building by building, room by room, sometimes hand to hand in frozen darkness, and didn't stop. He had read about a thing called Dunkirk, where a broken army stranded on a beach facing annihilation was rescued not by a navy but by civilians, fishermen, pleasure boat owners, people with no military training and no weapons who simply looked at the channel separating them from their people and decided that the water wasn't a barrier. It was just water. He had read about a species that had lost everything: cities, populations, entire generations, and rebuilt. Not once. Dozens of times. And each time they rebuilt, they built faster, stronger, as if destruction itself was just another form of education. And the thing that haunted Scrivener 7 most, the thing he couldn't explain to the Archon in terms the Dominion's strategic mind could process, was this: humanity's history wasn't a record of victories. It was a record of refusals. They didn't always win. They lost constantly, catastrophically, in ways that should have broken them permanently. But something in them, something that defied every behavioral model Scrivener 7 had ever encountered, simply refused to accept that losing meant being done. They had a word for it: spite. They would do something impossible, something costly, something strategically irrational, simply because someone told them they couldn't, simply because something tried to stop them, simply because giving up felt worse than dying. Scrivener 7 stared at the silence coming from humanity's star system and thought about Thermopylae. He thought about Dunkirk. He thought about a planet that had survived ice ages, mass extinctions, self-inflicted nuclear near annihilation, and a dozen plagues that should have ended them, and had responded to every single one of those apocalypses the same way: by getting up. He pulled up the Dominion's fleet manifest: 800 warships, 47 cruisers, 16 planetary siege engines capable of cracking a world's crust, enough firepower to turn a solar system into a graveyard. He looked at the silence coming from Earth, and for the first time in 30 years of academic study, Scrivener 7 felt something he recognized from human literature. He felt afraid. On the 14th rotation, the Dominion's deep scan probes finally penetrated humanity's inner system. What they found made no sense. No fleet mobilization. The human naval forces, such as they were, a few hundred short-range vessels built more for system patrol than warfare, were sitting in parking orbits around their various moons and stations. Not forming up, not arming, just sitting. No fortification of population centers, no mass evacuations, no underground shelter construction detected, no manufacturing surge. The human industrial complex was running at normal operational levels. Ships were being built at the same rate as last year, the same rate as 10 years ago. They were still producing food, entertainment, apparently still running their sporting events. Dominion analysts flagged 17 separate large-scale gatherings of humans in open stadiums, watching other humans compete in athletic contests, as if the Dominion fleet didn't exist, as if 42 days didn't matter. The probe data was transmitted back to Archon Verath Kas. He stared at it for a long time. "They're not preparing," his tactical admiral said flatly. "They've calculated the odds and they've frozen. It happens. The higher-function species sometimes experience complete systemic shutdown when facing existential threats. They simply stop." "Run the behavioral probability on that assessment," Verath Kas said. "The AI calculated for 2 seconds. Given historical precedent for the Homo sapiens species, the probability of complete behavioral shutdown is..." A pause. 0.003%. Silence. "Then what are they doing?" the admiral asked. No one answered. On the 22nd rotation, they got their first clue: a single human transmission, sent not on a military channel, not on a diplomatic frequency, sent on the same open broadcast humanity used for entertainment media. The kind of channel they used to send music and stories and news across their system. It was a speech, not to the Dominion. The Dominion realized, analyzing the transmission, that the speech wasn't addressed to them at all. It was addressed to humanity. The speaker was an older human female, silver-haired, wearing plain clothes, standing in what appeared to be an ordinary room. No ceremony, No military uniform, no flags. She spoke quietly, almost conversationally. Scrivener 7 translated personally. His hands were shaking again. "I know you're scared," she said. "I'm scared too. I want you to know that fear is appropriate. What's coming is real. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it isn't. But I need you to remember something. We have been afraid before. We have been at the edge before. We have stood in the dark and looked at something vast and terrible and thought, this is the end of us. And we are still here. Not because we were lucky. Not because the universe is kind. We are still here because somewhere in our blood there is something that does not know how to stay down. Something that looks at impossible odds and thinks, maybe. Something that has dragged us through ice ages and plagues and wars and every darkness we've ever fallen into and whispered, not yet. The Dominion declared war on us. We didn't declare war back, not because we're afraid of them, but because we have been at war before they found us. We've been at war with extinction since the day we first stood upright on this planet, and extinction has never won. So here is what I need from you. I don't need soldiers today. I need builders, I need thinkers, I need every human being on every world and every station to wake up tomorrow and do one thing. Keep going. That's all, just keep going. Build the thing you were building, teach the class you were teaching, feed your family, call the person you love, keep going. Because here is the thing the Dominion doesn't understand about us. They think war is about weapons. We know better. War is about will. And they declared war on the only species in this galaxy that has never, not once, run out of it. The transmission ended. The Dominion Fleet Council sat in silence. Then the admiral said quietly, "What does that mean? What is their strategy? Where are their weapons? Where is their fleet?" Scrivener 7 set down his translation console. "You're asking the wrong questions," he said softly. Everyone looked at him. "The question isn't where their weapons are," he said. "The question is, what have they been doing for 42 days that they don't want us to see?" The Dominion made its first mistake at the edge of the asteroid belt. It was supposed to be a demonstration, a show of force. Archon Verath Kas had ordered 3 cruisers to destroy one of humanity's outer mining stations, a small installation, lightly populated, its loss militarily insignificant. The point was psychological. The point was to shatter the eerie calm humanity had been projecting and replace it with the predictable, manageable spiral of panic that always preceded proper subjugation. The cruisers moved into position, and then something hit them. Not a missile, not an energy weapon. Something that the Dominion sensors couldn't immediately classify, a dense, fast-moving cloud of objects traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light, deployed from 17 different vectors simultaneously, converging on the cruisers from angles that should have been empty space. The 3 cruisers' shields handled the first wave. Their shields were rated for considerably worse. But the cloud didn't stop. It was composed, the sensors revealed, of metal. Specifically, refined metal ore from humanity's asteroid mining operations, ore that had been, over the past 42 days, very quietly and very efficiently accelerated to kinetic velocities that transformed ordinary chunks of rock and iron into weapons of extraordinary destructive power. Rail-launched, mass driver technology. One of the oldest, crudest, most primitive weapons systems in known galactic history. The shields held for 11 seconds. Then they didn't. 2 cruisers were destroyed so quickly their emergency transmissions never completed. The third survived barely and limped back to the fleet with hull breaches across 60% of its surface. The Fleet Council stared at the sensor data in silence. "They mined their asteroid belt," the admiral said slowly, as if the words didn't make sense. "They turned their entire asteroid belt into a weapons platform." "They didn't turn it," Scrivener 7 said. His voice was very quiet now. "They revealed it. The mining infrastructure was already there. It's been there for 200 years. They just repurposed it in 42 days without broadcasting a single military communication for us to intercept." "That's not possible," the admiral said. "The coordination required, the network scale, you'd need to synchronize thousands of installations across the entire asteroid field. They have a global communications network that has been operating continuously for over a century," Scrivener 7 said. "They call it the Internet. We classified it as a civilian entertainment and information system. He paused. We were wrong about what it was for. Silence. They hid their military coordination inside their civilian infrastructure, another officer said slowly. Every food order, every entertainment stream, every personal message, they were using it as cover traffic. We were watching the wrong signals. For 42 days, Scrivener 7 confirmed. They were speaking to each other constantly. We just didn't know what language to listen for. Verath Kas was quiet for a long moment. How much of the asteroid belt is weaponized? He asked. Scrivener 7 ran the calculation. He looked up. All of it, he said. The Dominion fleet advanced anyway, because that was what the Dominion did. 47 civilizations. Not one had stopped them. Some had hurt them. The Valorians had managed to destroy 60 ships before the end, but none had stopped them. The mathematics of Dominion power were considered by the Dominion themselves to be an immutable law of the universe, like gravity, like entropy. You did not stop the Dominion. You either surrendered or you were erased. So the fleet advanced. 800 ships, the surviving cruisers, the siege engines, massive and ancient and terrible, capable of delivering focused tectonic stress to a planet's lithosphere until the crust cracked and the mantle breathed fire into the sky. They advanced and they died. Not quickly. Not easily. Nothing about what humanity had built was elegant or advanced by galactic standards. It was crude. It was improvised. It was built from mining lasers and cargo haulers and mass drivers and decades of orbital infrastructure that the Dominion had dismissed as industrial rather than military. But it was everywhere. Every human station was a fortress. Every cargo vessel had been retrofitted, quietly, without fanfare, into something that could at minimum take a hit before going down. The asteroid belt was a killing field of kinetic projectiles and laser arrays cross-linked to a targeting network that was, infuriatingly, distributed across so many nodes that destroying any one part of it barely slowed it down. They lost ships, more than they had lost against any previous civilization. They still advanced, because the mathematics said they should win, because they had won 47 times before. Because Archon Verath Kas refused to transmit the kind of report that would make the Dominion Council question his competence. They reached the inner system. They found the human fleet waiting. A few hundred ships, just as the probes had shown, sitting in parking orbits, calm and organized and arranged in a formation that the Dominion's tactical AI couldn't quite classify, not because it was complex, but because it was wrong. It violated basic fleet engagement doctrine in ways that made no tactical sense, unless the formation wasn't designed for fleet combat at all. The Dominion tactical admiral realized it 3 seconds before it happened. They're not a battle fleet, he said. They're a delivery system. Move every human ship fired simultaneously, not at the Dominion fleet, past it. The human vessels weren't carrying weapons in any conventional sense. They were carrying cargo, specifically, cargo that had been loaded over the past 42 days at stations throughout the system, cargo that was now deploying in the space between the human fleet and the Dominion fleet, expanding into a vast, thin, glittering cloud that the Dominion sensors struggled to resolve. It looked, for one moment, almost beautiful. Then the Dominion fleet's shields hit it, and every ship in the vanguard died. They had seeded space with a cloud of metallic particulate ultra-fine, dispersed across a volume of space so large that flying around it would take longer than flying through it seemed like it should. At speeds the Dominion fleet was traveling, hitting that cloud was the equivalent of hitting a solid wall. Shields designed to stop energy weapons and missile impacts weren't designed for this. Nothing was designed for this, because no civilization in galactic history had ever tried it. Because it was the kind of strategy that came from a species that had spent centuries launching things into space with nothing but controlled explosions and mathematics. A species that understood viscerally in its bones exactly what kinetic energy at velocity could do. A species that had turned the vacuum of space, the empty nothing between the stars, into a weapon. 40 ships, gone in the first 5 seconds. The fleet scattered, reorganized, advanced more slowly, more carefully. The Dominion still had the numbers. The mathematics still said they should win, but the mathematics kept being wrong. Scrivener 7 sat in his research station while the battle raged outside and read human history, not the military history. He'd read that. He understood now why the military historians had missed it, because humanity's actual strategic genius had never lived in their military history. Their military history was spectacular but not the point. The point was everything else: economic history, social history, the disaster response records, the disease outbreak chronicles, the climate crisis documentation from humanity's 22nd century. He read about a species that had, within living memory, faced a respiratory pandemic that killed tens of millions, destabilized their entire global economy, and threatened to collapse the international cooperation networks they'd spent a century building. And they had responded by vaccinating 8 billion people in less than 2 years. 8 billion, individual by individual, coordinated across hundreds of nations, thousands of competing political interests, dozens of languages and cultures and economic systems that all wanted different things. They had done it arguing. They had done it angry. They had done it with some of their own members actively working against the effort, and they had still done it in less than 2 years. He read about a species that had faced the impending ecological collapse of their entire biosphere, the literal unraveling of the planetary systems that kept them alive, and had, generation by generation, imperfectly, chaotically, with enormous political conflict and personal sacrifice, begun to reverse it. He read about a species that had survived not one, not two, but 7 distinct historical periods that their own archaeologists described as near-extinction events, population bottlenecks, where the total number of surviving humans had dropped to numbers smaller than a single contemporary city. 7 times. The threat of humanity had been reduced to almost nothing. 7 times, the species had looked at that thread and pulled. And now he understood something that the Dominion's fleet, currently dying in the asteroid belt, had never accounted for. The Dominion had been trying to win a war. Humanity hadn't been fighting a war. Humanity had been doing what it had always done when something tried to kill it: adapting. Every ship the Dominion destroyed, the humans learned from, real time. The distributed network that the Dominion had dismissed as civilian infrastructure was functioning as a planetary nervous system, feeding tactical data to every remaining installation, every retrofitted cargo hauler, every mass driver in the asteroid belt. They were getting better in the middle of the fight, losing ships and learning from each loss, and adjusting and adapting in real time at a speed that no Dominion tactical model had ever accounted for, because no previous civilization had ever demonstrated this capability. Because every previous civilization had been built around centralized command structures that the Dominion could target and destroy. Humanity didn't have a centralized command structure. Humanity had 8 billion commanders. Scrivener 7 pulled up the current battle assessment. The Dominion had lost over 200 ships, more than in any previous campaign, more than in the 5 previous campaigns combined. They still had 600. The mathematics still said they should win. He thought about Thermopylae, about 300 soldiers at a mountain pass, and he thought about what had come after Thermopylae, about how that battle which the 300 had lost had bought enough time for the thing behind them to survive. He thought, what is behind them? What are they buying time for now? He nearly missed it in the data, nearly, but there it was, buried in the deep system scans, a construction signature the probes had flagged 40 days ago and which the Dominion analysts had classified as industrial expansion because that was what it looked like. What it looked like was shipbuilding, new shipbuilding, at a scale that Scrivener 7 stared at the numbers. He pulled the data from 40 days ago, compared it to the data from 30 days ago, 20, 10. The growth curve was. He checked his mathematics 3 times because he didn't believe it. Then he grabbed the communication channel to the fleet command. "Archon," he said. His voice was very steady. He was proud of how steady it was. "I need you to end this engagement immediately. Order a full retreat." "Retreat?" Varath Kas's voice was ice. "We have 600 ships. We have siege engines capable of—" "You have 600 ships today," Scrivener 7 said. The humans have been operating their shipbuilding infrastructure at 2,000% standard capacity for 40 days. They've been building behind us, Archon, in the outer system. Ships we haven't been watching because we were focused on the inner system where their existing fleet was. They hid their construction behind asteroid shadow and thermal noise, and they've been building for 40 days straight, and if the growth curve is accurate. He stopped. If the growth curve is accurate, what? Verath Koss demanded. Then by the time your siege engines reach Earth, Scrivener 7 said, humanity will have more ships than you. Silence on the channel. Then, that's not possible. You cannot build a war fleet in 40 days. They're not building a war fleet, Scrivener 7 said quietly. They're building what they always build when survival requires it. They built nuclear reactors in 4 years when they needed them. They built a global vaccine distribution network in 2 years when they needed it. They retooled entire continental manufacturing systems in months when a world war demanded it. They have been doing this, turning industry into survival infrastructure at incomprehensible speed for their entire history. We gave them 42 days, Scrivener 7 said. We thought it was a mercy, a formality. We handed them a deadline and they used it. Verath Koss didn't order the retreat. He couldn't, not psychologically, not culturally. The Dominion did not retreat. The Dominion had never retreated. To transmit a retreat order was to transmit an admission to the Dominion Council that something had gone wrong, and nothing was allowed to go wrong because the Dominion was invincible, because 47 civilizations had proven it. So he ordered the siege engines forward, and the new human fleet came around the curve of the outer system. Not hundreds of ships, thousands. They weren't elegant. They weren't up to Dominion engineering standards in armor or weaponry or drive efficiency. They were hastily built, some of them structurally marginal, pushed out of construction bays still off-gassing from fresh welds. They weren't a fleet the way the Dominion understood fleets. They were something else. They were the industrial output of a species that had decided, collectively, simultaneously, without central command and without hesitation, that this was the moment that required everything. The same way 8 billion people had found vaccine doses for each other. The same way civilians with fishing boats had crossed a channel. The same way 300 soldiers had held a pass, not because they were ordered to, because they looked at what needed to be done and they did it. The battle lasted 19 hours. At hour 6, Archon Verath Koss's flagship was disabled by a coordinated strike from 47 retrofitted cargo haulers. 47, the same number as humanity's, would be epitaph, and Scrivener 7 would spend the rest of his life wondering if that was deliberate. At hour 11, the siege engines were destroyed before they reached firing range. Not by military vessels. By the asteroid belt's mass driver network, retargeted, recalibrated, reaching across the inner system with kinetic rounds traveling at velocities that made the distance irrelevant. At hour 19, Verath Koss transmitted the first retreat order in the Dominion's recorded history. Of the 800 ships that had come to erase humanity, 63 limped home. Scrivener 7 was on one of them. He sat in his research station for the entire journey, reading human history. By the time they reached Dominion space, he was reading about a period humans called the Cold War, when 2 human nations had pointed enough nuclear weapons at each other to end their entire civilization, and had maintained that standoff for 45 years through a strategy they called mutually assured destruction. He was reading about how that strategy had worked not because of the weapons, but because both sides understood, deeply and correctly, that the other side would rather die than back down. He thought about 63 ships. He thought about the message that would reach the Dominion Council. He thought about what humanity would do with the time they had just bought. He requested an emergency audience with the Dominion High Council the moment the fleet returned. He got it. He stood before 12 of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy, and he said one thing. I need you to understand what we just did. We gave them 42 days and we told them we were coming. We broadcast our declaration across every frequency they have. We gave them the exact nature of our threat, our timeline, and our methodology, and then we let them prepare. We made them afraid, and then we waited while they did what humans do with fear. They turned it into fuel, and now they know they can beat us. Now they know exactly how we fight. Now they know every weapon system we deployed, every tactical pattern we used, every weakness in our shields that their improvised kinetic weapons exposed. They are, right now, loading that data into that distributed network of theirs, and 8 billion people are thinking about what to do with it. We have the largest military force in the galaxy. We have conquered 47 civilizations. And we just handed the 48th civilization the most comprehensive intelligence briefing in military history. We didn't start a war with humanity, we started their education. The council chamber was silent. Then the High Counselor said carefully, "What are you recommending, Scrivener 7? He thought about everything he had read. He thought about Thermopylae, about Dunkirk, about the Cold War standoff, about 8 billion people and fishing boats and vaccines and spite. Peace, he said. Immediately, unconditionally, whatever they ask for. And if they ask for more than peace, if they ask for reparations, territory, dominion membership, control over, give it to them," Scrivener 7 said. "You would have us capitulate entirely to a species that I would have us survive," Scrivener 7 said quietly. "Because if we don't make peace, if we go back, we won't lose fewer than 47 civilizations worth of ships this time. We will lose everything we have, everything we are, everything we've built. Because they will not stop, not ever. I have read their entire history, and there is not a single moment in 600,000 years where they stopped. They have never, in any conflict at any scale, accepted permanent defeat. We will destroy cities and they will rebuild them. We will kill millions and they will have more millions. We will break their fleets and they will build new fleets, better fleets, fleets designed specifically to kill the weapon systems they've now watched us use. We gave them 42 days and they nearly broke us. How long do you think they will need once they decide to come to us?" The silence in the council chamber lasted a very long time. The peace delegation arrived at Earth 7 months later. It was the first time in Dominion history that they sent a delegation rather than a fleet. Scrivener 7 led it. He had spent those 7 months finishing his research. He had read everything. Human literature, human philosophy, human religion, human science. He had read their poetry and their war memoirs and their children's books. He had watched their films and listened to their music and read the private diaries of people long dead. He thought he understood them now. He wasn't sure anyone could understand them completely. Stood in the conference room on Earth, a plain room, no ceremony, just a table and chairs and a window that looked out at a gray autumn sky, and across from him sat the silver-haired woman from the broadcast, the one who had told 8 billion people to keep going. She poured him something warm and set it in front of him and said simply, "Thank you for coming." He looked at her for a moment. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to be honest with me." "I'll try," she said. "The speech you gave. On the 22nd rotation, you said, they declared war on the only species in this galaxy that has never run out of will." He paused. "Did you believe that when you said it, or was it theater? Was it strategy, keeping your population calm so we wouldn't see panic? Was it?" She smiled. It was a tired smile, the kind worn by people who have been carrying something very heavy for a long time. "I believed every word," she said. "But I want to be clear, I was also terrified. I sat in that room for 6 hours before I recorded that speech and I was terrified. We all were." She looked out the window. "That's the thing I don't think your people have ever understood about us. We're not brave because we're not afraid. We're brave because we are afraid. Fear is information. Fear tells you what matters, and then you do it anyway because it matters." Scrivener 7 was quiet for a moment. "I've read your entire history," he said finally. "That must have been exhausting," she said. "It was extraordinary," he said, and he meant it simply, without flattery. "I've studied 39 species. None of them were like you. None of them had." He searched for the right word. She waited. "Persistence," he said finally. "Not as a strategy, not as a calculation, but as something that seems to be built into the structure of you, fundamental, cellular. As if the part of you that refuses to stop is not a decision but a fact." She considered this for a long moment. "You know what I think it is," she said. "I think it's because we almost didn't make it so many times. Ice ages, plagues, our own worst instincts. We've been almost extinct so often that it's part of our identity. We know what the edge looks like. We've been there, and we know that the edge is not the end." She looked at him steadily. You came to erase us, she said. And I understand why. We probably looked like nothing. A little planet, one star, primitive technology not worth the risk of letting us grow. She paused. But here's what I need you to carry back to your people, what I need you to make them understand. What? He said. We were always going to grow, she said quietly. With or without you. We were always going to reach the stars. We were going to arrive out there in that galaxy of yours as either a neighbor or an enemy, and the only thing that was ever going to determine which one was how you treated us when we were still small enough that you thought you had a choice. She let that sit. Then she said, "We'd like to be neighbors." Scrivener 7 looked at her. He thought about 47 civilizations. He thought about 63 ships limping home. He thought about everything he'd read. As would we, he said. And he meant that too. The treaty was signed that afternoon. It gave humanity nothing they hadn't already taken, and everything they'd been building toward since the first ancestor stood upright on a savanna and looked at the horizon and thought. Further, the Dominion never declared war on humanity again. They did, however, in the quiet language of political maneuvering, in closed council sessions and encrypted military communications, continue to call humanity by the designation their analysts had assigned after the battle. Not their official designation. Not Homo sapiens. Not Category 3 civilization. The designation that spread through the Dominion's military intelligence apparatus in whispers, in the careful language of people who had looked at 63 ships and needed a word for what had made the rest of them not come home. The quiet ones. Not because humanity was silent, but because the most terrifying moment of the Dominion's history had begun with 42 days of silence they hadn't known how to read, and ended with the understanding that the silence had never been surrender. It had been humanity doing what humanity always did when something tried to kill it. Thinking. Somewhere in a distant star system, in a Dominion archive that almost no one was permitted to access, there was a single document, the complete academic record of one Scrivener 7, cultural attaché and historian, who had spent 30 years studying humanity before anyone else thought them worth studying. The final line of his final report, filed 3 days after the peace treaty, read, "Do not, under any circumstances, give them a deadline. They will use every second of it.